The rain fell hard against our cabin's tin roof that July evening in 1952, making me feel more isolated than ever in these Kentucky hills. Each drop reminded me that our nearest neighbor lived a full mile away through thick woods. At 42 years old, I was Eleanor Hayes, a widow who earned money as a seamstress in Harlantown, mending dresses for women whose lives seemed easier than mine. My hands showed permanent marks from needles and thread. I had built this simple life after my husband Robert died in a mining accident 10 years ago, leaving me to raise our son Alex alone. Alex was 20 now, tall and strong, like his father, smart enough to earn a scholarship to trade school in Louisville. But he had dropped out after one semester, claiming the city noise bothered him too much. Now he worked occasional jobs around town, chopping wood, fixing fences for neighbors. But I noticed something troubling in his eyes lately, a darkness that reminded me of storm clouds building before they released their fury. He seemed angry about everything, though I could not understand why. My father Samuel lived with us too. At 70 years old, he had moved in 5 years ago after selling his small farm. Samuel helped with daily tasks and provided stability I desperately needed. He taught Alex to fish in the creek behind our house and shared stories from the Great War. But recently, tension had grown between Samuel and Alex. My son accused his grandfather of treating him like a child and always taking my side in disagreements. I should have paid more attention to these warning signs. I should have recognized the danger building in my own home. Instead, I focused on keeping peace between them, believing that family love could overcome any problem. This belief would nearly cost me everything. That night, as the storm raged outside, I had no idea that the real storm was waiting inside our cabin. The violence that would shatter my world was about to begin, and the person I trusted most would become the source of my greatest terror. Life in rural Kentucky during the early 1950s moved to the rhythm of hard work and simple survival. Our small community of Harlan depended on coal mining, which provided jobs but also brought constant danger. The mountains around us were beautiful but unforgiving, especially during harsh winters when snow could trap families for weeks. I had grown up in these hills, marrying Robert when I was 18 in a quiet church ceremony. He worked in the mines like most local men, and for several years we lived happily in our small cabin. Robert was kind and gentle, though he sometimes drank too much when work stress overwhelmed him. When Alex was born in 1932, Robert seemed genuinely happy to be a father. But mining was dangerous work. Cave-ins happened regularly, and black lung disease slowly killed many miners. When Robert died in an accident at shaft number 3, I was left alone with 10-year-old Alex and very little money. The mining company provided a small settlement, but it was barely enough to survive. I turned to sewing to support us. Mrs. Caldwell, who owned the dress shop in town, gave me work altering clothes for local women. The pay was small, but it kept food on our table. Mrs. Caldwell was a kind woman in her 60s who often worried about my situation. "Eleanor, you work too hard," she would say while watching me bend over delicate fabrics. "A young woman like you should think about remarrying. Alex needs a father figure." But I had Alex and Samuel, and that felt like enough family for me. Samuel moved in when Alex turned 15, selling his tobacco farm after several bad harvests made it impossible to continue. My father was a quiet man with weathered hands and sharp intelligence. He had served in World War I and carried himself with dignity earned through hard experience. "Just temporary," Samuel insisted when he arrived with his few possessions. "Until the boy grows up and you feel more settled." Alex welcomed his grandfather initially. Samuel taught him practical skills like reading weather patterns and maintaining farm equipment. They would sit together in the evenings while Samuel carved small wooden animals and shared stories about his military service. "Did you really fight Germans, Grandpa?" Alex would ask, fascinated by tales of battle. "War changes a man," Samuel would answer seriously. "Taking another person's life leaves marks on your soul that never fully heal. The important thing is knowing when violence is truly necessary." Alex absorbed these conversations with intense interest. Even as a teenager, he showed signs of the man he would become, intelligent, strong, but also impatient with authority and quick to anger when he felt disrespected. His teachers noticed this tendency. Alex is very bright, his English teacher, Mrs. Morrison, told me during a parent conference. But he seems to carry anger that goes beyond normal teenage rebellion. Has he experienced trauma that might explain this? I explained about losing his father, but Mrs. Morrison's concerns stayed with me. Alex did seem angrier than other boys his age, though he never directed that anger toward me or Samuel directly. Instead, he would make cutting remarks about neighbors' failures or become furious when he felt someone had slighted him. The scholarship to Louisville Trade School should have been wonderful news. Alex had earned it through excellent grades despite our difficult circumstances. When the acceptance letter arrived, I cried with happiness. "Your father would be so proud," I told him, but Alex's reaction seemed oddly subdued. "It's just trade school," he said. "Not like becoming a doctor or lawyer." Samuel tried to encourage him. "Honest work pays honest wages. Electrical training will give you opportunities we never had." But Alex lasted only 4 months in Louisville before returning home with his belongings in a single bag and bitterness written across his face. "The city isn't for me," he explained when I asked what happened. "Too much noise, too many people who think they're better than everyone else. But your classes, your instructors said you were doing well." "Classes were fine. Everything else was the problem." Alex's voice carried an edge I had been hearing more often lately. Rich students whose fathers paid their way looking down on scholarship boys from places like this. Teachers who played favorites based on family connections. Samuel looked up from his Bible. "Life is full of people who think they're superior. The question is whether you let that stop you or use it as motivation." "Easy for you to say," Alex snapped. "You didn't have to listen to them call us hillbillies and coal dust families." This argument revealed the first serious crack in our family harmony. Samuel, who had worked multiple jobs during the Depression to feed his family, could not understand giving up such an opportunity because of hurt feelings. Alex, sensitive to every slight and perceived injustice, could not understand why he should have to prove himself worthy of basic respect. After that night, the easy affection between Alex and Samuel began souring into something harder. Alex took jobs around town, but performed them with visible resentment. More troubling were changes in his behavior at home. Small items began disappearing. A silver spoon that had belonged to my mother, then a pocket watch Robert had carried. When I asked Alex about them, he claimed ignorance with such wounded dignity that I felt guilty for suspecting him. "You think I'm stealing from my own family?" he would ask, looking genuinely hurt. Samuel noticed the changes too. "That boy has darkness growing inside him," he told me one evening as we sat on the porch. "Reminds me of soldiers I knew who started enjoying violence too much." I wanted to argue, but deep down, I had begun noticing things that frightened me. The way Alex sometimes watched me when he thought I was not looking. Not with a son's affection, but with something calculating. The way his temper flared over increasingly minor problems. The way he seemed to take pleasure in small cruelties, like stepping on insects or making harsh comments about neighbors' misfortunes. But he was my son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after Robert's death. How could I believe that the sweet child who used to bring me wildflowers was capable of genuine evil? I pushed these concerns aside, telling myself that Alex just needed time to mature and find his place in the world. This willful blindness would nearly destroy everything I held dear. That evening of July 15th, 1952, remains burned into my memory with terrible clarity. I had stayed late at Mrs. Caldwell's shop, finishing intricate beadwork on a wedding dress for the mayor's daughter. My eyes ached from the detailed work, and my back protested from hours bent over delicate fabric. Storm clouds had been building all day, turning the sky dark purple and filling the air with electric tension. By the time I finished work, the first raindrops were beginning to fall. I hurried through town and up the winding dirt road that led to our cabin, hoping to reach home before the storm hit in full force. Our cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense woods. On peaceful days, this isolation felt like protection from the world's troubles. Tonight, it felt like a trap. The windows were completely dark, which struck me as strange. Samuel always lit our kerosene lamps at dusk, a habit from his farming days when evening chores had to be finished regardless of weather. I pushed open the front door, calling out as I shook rain from my coat. "Pa, Alex, I'm home!" The silence that greeted me felt wrong. But there was something else. A smell that made my stomach turn. Sweet and metallic, like copper pennies mixed with something organic and terrible. "Pa!" I called again, moving deeper into the cabin. Our living room was destroyed. Chairs overturned, Samuel's Bible torn apart with pages scattered across the floor, his small table where he kept whittling tools knocked over completely. Then I saw the dark stain spreading across our wooden floorboards, and my world collapsed. Samuel lay crumpled beside his rocking chair, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. The flannel shirt I had mended for him just last week was soaked with blood. His throat had been cut so deeply that his head was nearly severed from his body. The scream that tore from my throat was pure animal terror. I dropped to my knees beside him, pressing my hands against his neck in a desperate search for any sign of life. But his skin was already cooling his eyes, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. The blood around him had begun to thicken, telling me this had happened hours ago. "He's gone, Ma!" I spun around so violently that I nearly fell. Alex stood in the kitchen doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against a lamp he must have lit in the back room. His clothes were torn and dirty, his hair damp with rain, and there were fresh scratches on his face and hands. "Alex," I sobbed, reaching toward him. "Thank God you're safe. We have to call Sheriff Harlan immediately. Someone broke in and murdered your grandfather." "They killed him for nothing." Alex continued, his voice strangely flat and emotionless. "Tore the place apart looking for money, but Pa never kept cash in the house. Just an old man who fought back when he should have stayed quiet." Something in his tone made me pause. I looked at him more carefully, noticing details my initial relief had missed. His shirt was ripped at the shoulder, and there were dark stains on his hands that could have been mud or blood. Most disturbing was his expression, not shocked or grieving, but calm in a way that seemed rehearsed. "Where were you when this happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Working late at the miller's place like I told you this morning. When I got back, I found him exactly like this." Alex stepped closer, and I caught another scent beneath the rain and earth. Whiskey, strong and sour. The front door was standing wide open, rain blowing inside. Whoever did this was long gone. I looked around the destroyed room again, trying to understand what I was seeing. The destruction looked almost staged. Valuable items untouched, while worthless objects lay smashed. "We need to call for help," I said. "The telephone line's been cut. Storm probably brought down a tree somewhere." Alex moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "No point trying to reach town tonight anyway. Roads will be washed out before morning." The casual way he delivered this information sent ice through my veins. Too prepared, too convenient. As if he had already considered every obstacle to getting help. "Alex," I said carefully, "how do you know the phone line is cut if you just arrived?" He turned from the window, and in the flickering lamplight, his face looked like a stranger's. "Tried to call the sheriff as soon as I found Pa. No dial tone." It sounded reasonable, but everything about this felt wrong. Then my eyes fell on something that made my blood freeze completely. There, half hidden under our overturned coffee table, was Samuel's hunting knife. The blade was dark with blood, and lying beside it was a piece of cloth that looked torn from a shirt. The same color and fabric as what Alex was wearing. "Alex," I whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. "The knife." He followed my gaze, and for just one instant, I saw something flicker across his face. Not surprise, but annoyance, as if he had forgotten an important detail. "Must have fallen during the struggle," he said, moving quickly to pick up both knife and cloth. Poor Pa probably tried to defend himself, but Samuel's hands showed no defensive wounds. There were no signs he had time to fight back. The angle and depth of the throat wound spoke of someone strong and determined, not a desperate stranger looking for money. "Alex!" My voice cracked on his name. "Tell me the truth. What really happened here?" He straightened slowly, still holding the bloody knife. When he looked at me, his eyes held something I had never seen before. Something cold and calculating that made him look like a complete stranger. The truth." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The truth is that the old man had it coming. Always interfering in our lives, always telling me I wasn't good enough. Always taking your side against me." The words hit me like physical blows. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I solved a problem that has been festering for years." Alex wiped the blade clean on the torn cloth before setting it on our mantel. "Samuel was poison disguised as wisdom and family duty. But he's gone now, and we can finally be a real family." The room seemed to spin around me. This could not be happening. This could not be real. "You killed him. You murdered your own grandfather." I removed an obstacle. Alex's voice was patient, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. Now we can live our lives without his constant interference and judgment. Terror gave me strength. I lunged toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to run to escape to get help. But Alex was faster and stronger, catching me before I had taken 3 steps. His hands gripped my arms with crushing force, spinning me around to face him. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice remained calm, but I heard steel beneath the surface. "There's nowhere to run, and even if there was, who would believe you? Poor Eleanor, driven mad by grief, accusing her own innocent son of murder." "Let me go!" I struggled against his grip, clawing at his hands, but he was immovable as stone. "Someone will come looking. The sheriff will investigate. The sheriff will see exactly what I want him to see. Signs of a break-in, an old man killed by robbers, a grieving family traumatized by violence." Alex's smile never wavered. "And you're going to help sell that story. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you join Pa in the ground." The threat was delivered with cold certainty that told me this was not anger talking, but calculated planning. This was not my son speaking. This was something else, something that had been growing inside him like cancer, until it consumed everything good. "Why?" The question came out as a broken whisper. "Why would you do this?" "Because I could," Alex said simply. "Because he deserved it for treating me like dirt, and because it felt good. Really, really good. What happened next would haunt me for the rest of my life." As Alex forced me to the floor, amid the wreckage of our home and Samuel's cooling blood, I learned that monsters do not always come from outside in the darkness. Sometimes they grow up right beside you, fed by your own love and blind trust, until the day they finally show you what they have become. The violation was brutal and complete, not just physical, but the total shattering of everything I believed about family love and the boy I had raised from infancy. When it was over, Alex stood and adjusted his clothes as if nothing unusual had happened. "Clean this up," he ordered. "And remember, one word of truth to anyone and you'll disappear just like those robbers who killed Samuel." I lay there broken as the storm raged on, understanding that this was only the beginning of my nightmare. The days following that horrible night blurred together like a waking nightmare, where I had to perform grief and shock while my captor watched every move with calculating eyes. Sheriff Harlan arrived the next morning with 2 deputies and the county coroner, a thin man who pronounced Samuel dead from violent trauma consistent with robbery. Terrible business," Sheriff Harlan said, settling his large frame into Samuel's chair, where my father had been reading just hours before Alex cut his throat. He was a man in his 50s, with the deliberate manner of someone used to being the final authority. "Strangers passing through, most likely. Hard times make some people desperate enough to kill for pocket change." I sat where Alex had positioned me on our sofa, hands folded to hide their shaking nodding at appropriate moments. Inside, I screamed. Every instinct urged me to point at my son and tell the truth. But Alex's words echoed in my mind. Who would believe me? "Mrs. Hayes, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask questions about what you saw," Sheriff Harlan said gently. The lie came easier than it should have. "The front door was open when I got home, rain blowing inside. I called for Pa and Alex, but when I came into the living room, I found him like this." Real tears for Samuel spilled down my cheeks, though not for the reason I claimed. "And your son?" "Working late at the Miller place." Alex answered for himself, voice thick with fake grief. "When I got home and saw what happened, I tried calling for help, but the phone line was down from the storm." Sheriff Harlan made notes. "The Millers confirm you were there until after dark." "Yes, sir. Repairing fence in their north pasture. Started raining hard around 8, so Mr. Miller sent us home." Alex's performance was perfect. The right details delivered with exactly the nervous energy you would expect from someone who had discovered his grandfather murdered. The investigation took less than 2 hours. They photographed Samuel's body, collected the knife as evidence, and took our statements. I watched my son lie with such practiced ease that I wondered how many other deceptions I had swallowed over the years. "We'll do our best to catch whoever did this," Sheriff Harlan promised as they prepared to leave with Samuel's body. "But without witnesses or better physical evidence, it will be difficult. These drifter types move on quickly." After they left, the cabin felt enormous and empty despite Alex's oppressive presence. He had changed into clean clothes and burned his blood-stained shirt in our wood stove, but I could still smell Samuel's blood in the air. "You did well," Alex said as we watched the sheriff's car disappear. "Very convincing performance." "It wasn't a performance. I loved him." Did you love the idea of him? The wise grandfather, the family patriarch. Alex moved behind me, hands resting on my shoulders with false gentleness. Face reality. He was holding us back with constant criticism. Now we can finally be free. Free! I turned to face him. Grief overwhelming fear for a moment. "You murdered your grandfather in cold blood. How is that freedom?" The blow came so fast I did not see it. Alex's hand cracked across my face, hard enough to send me staggering stars exploding in my vision. "Never raise your voice to me again," he said conversationally. "And don't pretend moral outrage when you're just as trapped in this as I am now. We're accomplices, partners in crime." That word, accomplices, hit me like ice water. By lying to the sheriff, by helping cover up Samuel's murder, I had made myself complicit. Even if I went to authorities now who would believe I had been forced into silence, a jury would see a mother protecting her son, not a victim coerced by threats. The funeral passed in a haze of casseroles and condolences from well-meaning neighbors. Alex played his role perfectly, accepting sympathy with just the right mixture of masculine stoicism and grief. But the real prison began after Samuel was buried. Alex moved completely back into our cabin, watching me constantly. The abuse continued, nightly assaults that left me bruised and hollow. My job became a brief escape, but even there I had to isolate myself, fearing questions about my withdrawn behavior. Alex quit his jobs around town, claiming he needed to stay home to protect me from the supposed robbers who might return. Our remote location, surrounded by forests that became treacherous after rains, made escape seem impossible. The dirt road to town often washed out, leaving us cut off for days. During the day, when unexpected visitors might arrive, Alex played the dutiful son, helping with chores, speaking respectfully, maintaining the facade of normal family life. But at night, he entered my bedroom with the casual assumption of ownership that made my skin crawl. The first time I tried to fight back grabbing a kitchen knife I had hidden under my mattress. Alex disarmed me easily and laughed. "Try that again, and I'll tell the sheriff how unstable you've become. Maybe even suggest you killed Samuel yourself in some kind of breakdown." I began to understand why victims of ongoing trauma sometimes seem to cooperate with their tormentors. It was not weakness. It was survival. Each day I endured was another day of life, another possible opportunity to escape. But opportunities were rare. Alex had effectively isolated me from the outside world, monitoring my interactions and ensuring I was never alone long enough to seek help. When Mrs. Jenkins visited bringing a sympathy pie, Alex greeted her at the door. "Mom's resting," he said with charming concern. "Taking Samuel's death pretty hard, you understand?" From inside, I tried desperately to signal with my eyes, mouthing, "Help me." But she missed it completely, chatting about town gossip before leaving. Alex turned to me with a satisfied smirk. "Nice try." That failure crushed me, but it also hardened my resolve. I could not rely on others yet. I had to build evidence first. So I began documenting everything in secret. Working during brief moments when Alex's attention was elsewhere, I started keeping a hidden notebook where I recorded dates of assaults, threats he made, and injuries he inflicted. I buried this evidence in our garden under the cover of tending vegetables. I also began testing the boundaries of Alex's control, looking for weaknesses. I took longer routes to and from town, engaged in extended conversations with customers at the dress shop, volunteered for church activities that put me in contact with other people. Alex noticed, of course. His punishments became more severe and creative. But I also learned valuable information about his habits and schedules, knowledge that might someday save my life. The breaking point came in November when the first snows began isolating us even more completely. I was working late at the shop, helping with Christmas pageant costumes, when Mrs. Caldwell made an observation that chilled me. "Eleanor, you've gotten so thin. And those dark circles under your eyes? Are you sleeping properly?" I made excuses about grief affecting my appetite, but Mrs. Caldwell's concerned gaze lingered on my face. She was perceptive, and I wondered what she might be seeing beneath my carefully constructed mask. "If you ever need someone to talk to," she said quietly, "someone who isn't too close to your situation, you know where to find me." It was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging something might be wrong. For a moment, I considered telling her everything, but fear held my tongue as Alex's warnings echoed, "Who would believe you?" That night, I came home to find Alex waiting with whiskey and a look that made my knees weak with terror. He had been drinking heavily, and drunk Alex was even more unpredictable than sober Alex. "Did you have a nice chat with Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked with false casualness. My heart pounded. "We discussed the Christmas pageant. Nothing important. Nothing important." Alex took a long drink, then set the bottle down with exaggerated care. "That's where you're wrong. Everything you say matters. Every conversation, every glance, every expression on your face. I haven't said anything about—" "I know you haven't. Yet." He stood up, swaying slightly, and I saw his other hand held Samuel's hunting knife. "But I can see you thinking about it, planning something." The accusation was terrifyingly accurate. I had been planning gathering resources for an escape attempt I was not sure I had courage to make. "I'm not planning anything," I lied. "I just want to survive this." "Survival requires loyalty." Alex agreed, moving closer with the knife held casually. "Complete, unquestioning loyalty, and I'm starting to wonder if you understand that." What followed was the worst beating I had received since the night he murdered Samuel. When it was over, I lay curled on the floor, spitting blood, and struggling to breathe through what felt like cracked ribs. "Remember this pain," Alex said as he cleaned the knife. "Remember how easily I can hurt you. Because next time you even think about betraying me, it will be 10 times worse." As I dragged myself to bed that night, every movement sending spikes of agony through my battered body, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to escape or die trying. The middle ground of endless abuse was no longer acceptable. I just had to figure out how to survive the attempt. Winter's grip on the Kentucky hills became my prison as snow piled high around our cabin, and Alex's control over my life tightened like a noose. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now felt suffocating. Some days, snow blocked our road, completely cutting us off from town for weeks at a time. During these periods, Alex's behavior became even more unpredictable and violent. But isolation also meant Alex sometimes had to leave me alone for essential tasks, chopping firewood, checking on our water supply, or digging us out after particularly heavy storms. I used these precious moments of freedom to advance my secret preparations. First, I expanded my hidden evidence collection. Beyond the notebook documenting abuse, I began sketching my injuries and hiding the drawings in a waterproof container buried deep in our garden. I also started saving small amounts of money from my dress shop wages, building an escape fund coin by coin in a mason jar. The money came from a deception I felt no guilt about. When customers paid me directly for alterations, I would tell Alex the payment was slightly less than the actual amount, keeping the difference for myself. Mrs. Caldwell, bless her heart, sometimes paid me in cash without recording the full amount in her books, though I am not sure if this was intentional help or simply poor bookkeeping. My second line of preparation involved studying Alex's routines and weaknesses. I learned that he drank heavily on certain nights, usually when winter storms made him feel as trapped as I was. During these drinking sessions, he would become philosophical about Samuel's murder, sometimes revealing details that made my blood run cold. The old man looked so surprised when I grabbed him. Alex told me one snowy February evening, whiskey making him talkative. Like he couldn't believe his own grandson would hurt him. But surprise is good in situations like that. Means they don't fight back as hard. These drunken confessions were horrifying to hear, but they also gave me information I could use. Alex was proud of what he had done, which meant he was careless about concealing evidence. I began searching his room more systematically during his absences, looking for anything that might help convict him. My biggest breakthrough came in March when I discovered a tin box hidden under his mattress. Inside were letters, dozens of them postmarked from Chicago and signed R. Hayes. The return address made my hands shake. Robert Hayes, my supposedly dead husband, writing to our son from a Chicago address. The first letter was dated April 1943, exactly 1 year after Robert's supposed death in the mining accident. As I read his words, my world tilted completely off its axis. "Alex, your mother probably told you I died in a cave-in by now. Truth is, I got tired of being trapped in that backwoods prison with a nagging wife and her controlling father. Faked the whole thing with help from a miner who owed me money. Started fresh here in Chicago where a man can live like a man. I had to stop reading and steady myself against Alex's dresser." Robert was alive. My husband had not died heroically in a mining accident. He had abandoned us, deliberately leaving me to raise Alex alone while I grieved for a man who was living comfortably in the city. The letters got worse. Robert had spent years poisoning Alex against Samuel and me, painting us as obstacles to his rightful inheritance and independence. Letter after letter filled Alex's head with resentment and entitlement, building toward the violence that eventually erupted. One letter from 1951 was particularly chilling. "You're almost 20 now, son. Old enough to understand what needs to be done. That old man has had too much influence over your life for too long. A real man wouldn't stand for it." And finally, the letter that connected directly to Samuel's murder, dated just 3 months before that terrible night. "Time's running short. I want to see justice done before I die. That old man stole my family from me. If they won't respect family loyalty, maybe they need to learn about consequences. You know what needs to be done. I photographed several letters using an old camera I had found among Samuel's belongings, hiding the film carefully before returning the originals to their box. This was evidence that could destroy Alex's claims of temporary insanity or overwhelming grief. These letters proved his actions were the result of years of deliberate manipulation by his father. But having evidence was only half the battle. I still needed a way to get that evidence to authorities without getting myself killed in the process. My opportunity came in late April, when spring floods made travel dangerous, but also provided cover for unusual behavior. Alex had to spend several days helping neighbors whose homes were threatened by rising creek water, leaving me alone for longer periods than usual. During one of these absences, I made my boldest move yet. I walked the 3 miles to town through muddy roads, carrying my evidence in a canvas bag hidden under my coat. My destination was Dr. Ellis's office, where I hoped to find help from someone with both medical training and community respect. Dr. Ellis was a kind man in his 60s who had been Samuel's physician. When I appeared at his office unannounced, muddy and exhausted from the difficult walk, he welcomed me with genuine concern. Mrs. Hayes. What brings you out in weather like this? Is everything all right at home? I had rehearsed this conversation during the long walk to town. Dr. Ellis, I need your help with something very serious. But first, I need your word that what I'm about to tell you will remain confidential until I say otherwise. Something in my tone made him study my face more carefully. Of course. Patient confidentiality is sacred in my practice. I'm not here as a patient. I'm here as someone whose life is in danger. I pulled out my notebook and photographs, spreading them on his desk. Alex killed Samuel. He's been forcing me to help cover it up through threats and violence. I have proof, but I need help getting it to the right authorities safely. Dr. Ellis examined my evidence with growing alarm. The sketches of injuries, the photographs of Robert's letters, the detailed timeline of abuse and threats. When he finished, his face was pale with shock and anger. My God, Eleanor, how long has this been going on? Since the night Samuel died. Almost 2 years now. I showed him the most recent injury sketches depicting bruises from the November beating. Alex made me lie to Sheriff Harlan about what happened. He said if I told the truth, he would kill me and make it look like an accident. We need to contact the sheriff immediately, Dr. Ellis said, reaching for his telephone. No! I grabbed his arm. Not yet. Alex is expecting me back by evening. If I don't return, or if he suspects I've talked to anyone, he'll disappear and I'll be found dead in some accident. We need a plan that protects me while ensuring he can't escape justice. Dr. Ellis set down the phone, his medical training helping him understand the psychology of dangerous situations. What do you propose? I need you to contact someone in Louisville, state police or federal authorities who aren't connected to our local community. Give them copies of this evidence and ask them to investigate Robert Hayes in Chicago. If they can arrest him first, it might shock Alex into making mistakes. And in the meantime, I go back home and continue pretending everything is normal. But now, I have an ally who knows the truth. If something happens to me, you'll know Alex was responsible. Dr. Ellis agreed to my plan, though he insisted on examining my current injuries first. The medical documentation he created would provide additional evidence of ongoing abuse. As I walked back home through the mud and rising flood waters, I felt something I had not experienced in almost 2 years: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone clinging to illusion, but the practical hope of someone with a real plan for survival and justice. But I also knew that the most dangerous part was still ahead. Alex had become comfortable with his power over me, confident that fear and isolation had broken my spirit completely. When he discovered that his control was slipping, his reaction would be swift and potentially lethal. I just had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. The next few weeks passed in a careful dance of deception. I maintained my submissive behavior, while secretly preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. Alex seemed to sense some change in me, studying my face with suspicion during our interactions. "You've been different lately," he said one evening in early May. "Quieter, more thoughtful." "I'm tired, Alex. Tired of fighting and hurting. Tired of hoping things will change." It should have satisfied him, this apparent surrender. Instead, it seemed to make him more paranoid. He began checking on me more frequently, searching through my belongings, questioning me about every conversation I had in town. The breaking point came when Dr. Ellis sent word through Mrs. Caldwell that state authorities had arrested Robert in Chicago on charges of fraud and conspiracy. The message was coded as concern about my health, but I understood its real meaning the first domino had fallen. That night, Alex came home from town with whiskey on his breath and murder in his eyes. Someone had told him about unusual questions being asked regarding Samuel's death and Robert's supposed funeral. "We need to talk," he said in a voice that made my blood freeze. Right now, I knew the moment of truth had arrived. Everything I had planned and prepared for was about to be tested in a confrontation that would determine whether justice prevailed or evil triumphed once again. The revelation that shattered my understanding of everything came on a scorching May afternoon in 1953, when Alex left to help the Morrison family repair storm damage to their barn. This gave me nearly 4 hours alone, the longest period of unsupervised time I had experienced since Samuel's murder. I knew this might be my only chance to conduct a thorough search of Alex's possessions. His room had always been off limits even when he was a child, but desperation had finally overcome maternal respect for privacy. I had searched quickly before, but never with enough time to be truly systematic. Working methodically, I examined every drawer, every hiding place, every corner where evidence might be concealed. Most of what I found matched my expectations. Empty bottles hidden from my disapproving eyes, small items that might have been stolen, and the journal I had discovered earlier, documenting his mental state before and after the murder. But when I lifted his mattress to check underneath my fingers, encountered something that made my heart race, a metal box wedged between the mattress and wooden bed frame. Inside were letters, more than 50 of them bound with string and organized by date. The return address on every envelope read, R. Hayes, Chicago, Illinois. Robert, my supposedly dead husband. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the first letter as I read words that destroyed everything I believed about my life. April 15th, 1943. Alex, by now, your mother has probably told you I died in a mining accident. That's what I wanted everyone to believe. Truth is, I got tired of living like a prisoner in that godforsaken cabin with a wife who chose her father over her husband every single day. So I arranged my own death with help from Jake Morrison, who owed me gambling debts. He falsified the accident report in exchange for me keeping quiet about money he stole from the mining company. I'm living in Chicago now under a new identity, finally free to be my own man. I sank to the floor as the magnitude of Robert's betrayal crashed over me. He had not died heroically trying to provide for his family. He had abandoned us, deliberately faking his death and leaving me to struggle alone while grieving for a man who was alive and comfortable in the city. But the letters revealed something even worse than abandonment. Robert had been systematically poisoning Alex against Samuel and me for over 10 years, turning our son into a weapon of revenge against the family who had supposedly wronged him. Letter after letter documented this psychological manipulation. June 10th, 1945. Your mother thinks she's so righteous always running to Samuel when we had disagreements, instead of supporting her husband like a proper wife should. She chose that old man over me, son. Don't let her make the same choice against you when your time comes to be head of the family. September 3rd, 1948. You're getting old enough now to understand that family loyalty works both ways. I was loyal to Eleanor and Samuel, but they were disloyal to me. They drove me away with their constant criticism and interference. Remember that when you're making decisions about who deserves your respect and who doesn't. March 17, 1950. Samuel has too much influence over your life and your mother's. A real man wouldn't tolerate an outsider controlling his family that way. Your mother is weak. She always was. But she's still a Hayes by marriage. That means she belongs to Hayes men, not to her meddling father. The letters grew more specific and disturbing as Alex approached adulthood. August 22nd, 1951. You're almost 20 now, old enough to take control of your rightful inheritance. That cabin should belong to you, not be run according to an old man's whims. A strong son would make sure his mother understood where her loyalty should lie. And finally, the letter that connected directly to Samuel's murder. April 8th, 1952. I'm getting older and want to see justice done before I die. That old man stole my wife and son from me through manipulation and lies. Your mother chose his side over mine because she's too weak to stand up to him. But you're strong, Alex. You're a Hayes man. If they won't show proper family loyalty, maybe it's time they learned about family consequences. Sometimes the only way to clean poison out of a wound is to cut deep enough to reach healthy flesh. I read that final letter 3 times before its full meaning sank in. Robert had not just abandoned us. He had spent years deliberately turning Alex into a killer, using our son as an instrument of revenge against Samuel and me. Every moment of anger Alex had shown, every resentment he had nursed, had been carefully cultivated through his father's poisonous influence. The murder had not been a sudden explosion of rage or mental breakdown. It had been the culmination of a decade-long campaign of psychological warfare, with Robert pulling the strings from Chicago while Alex became his weapon against the people who had loved and raised him. This explained so much that had puzzled me. Alex's increasing anger toward Samuel over the past few years. His resentment about money and respect that seemed disproportionate to any real grievances. His casual cruelty and lack of genuine remorse after the murder. He had been programmed to see us as enemies rather than family. But it also revealed something even more horrifying. I had been completely blind to this manipulation happening under my own roof. My desire to preserve Alex's connection to his father's memory, to let him maintain some positive image of the man who had supposedly died providing for us, had given Robert the perfect cover for his psychological warfare. I photographed the most damaging letters using Samuel's old camera, my hands steadier now that shock was giving way to cold fury. This evidence would destroy any claims of temporary insanity or overwhelming grief. These letters proved that Alex's actions were premeditated, the result of years of deliberate conditioning, by a father who had turned his own son into a murderer. More importantly, they revealed that Robert was still alive and reachable by authorities. If he could be arrested and forced to testify about his manipulation of Alex, it would provide crucial evidence that my son had been influenced by outside forces. This might not excuse his actions, but it could explain them in ways that would help ensure justice was served. As I carefully returned the letters to their hiding place, making sure everything looked undisturbed, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This was no longer just about escaping an abusive situation or surviving until I could get help. This was about exposing a conspiracy that had destroyed my family and murdered an innocent man. Robert thought he had won by turning Alex into his instrument of revenge. He thought he had destroyed Samuel's influence and claimed ownership over me through our son's violence. But he had made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated the woman he had abandoned, assuming I was too weak and broken to fight back. He was about to learn how wrong he was. When Alex returned that evening, sweaty and tired from barn repair work, I greeted him with the same submissive demeanor I had maintained for months. But inside, I was already planning his destruction, and his father's. "Well, how was work at the Morrisons?" I asked, serving him dinner with steady hands. "Fine. Hard work, but good pay." Alex studied my face with the suspicion that had become habitual. "You seem different tonight. More relaxed." I've been thinking about what you said last week, about accepting our situation and focusing on being a family. The lie came easily now that I understood the true scope of what I was fighting. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time I stopped fighting and started appreciating what we have. Alex smiled with genuine pleasure for the first time in months. I'm glad you're finally seeing sense, Ma. We can be happy together if you just stop trying to change things that can't be changed. That night, as he used my body with his usual casual brutality, I stared at the ceiling and planned my revenge with mathematical precision. Robert had spent 10 years turning Alex into a monster. I was going to spend however long it took to ensure they both faced justice for what they had done to Samuel, to me, and to the idea of family itself. The war was far from over. But now, I finally understood who my real enemies were, and that knowledge would make all the difference in the battles ahead. The discovery of Robert's letters had given me crucial knowledge, but it also put me in greater danger than ever before. Alex began watching me with increased suspicion, as if some instinct warned him that the balance of power between us was shifting. His paranoia made him more violent and unpredictable, turning our cabin into a battlefield where every interaction carried the potential for explosion. The first sign of trouble came in early June when Alex announced that he had been asking questions around town about suspicious strangers who might have been involved in Samuel's murder. Sheriff Harlan says there have been some unusual inquiries lately. Alex told me over breakfast, his eyes never leaving my face. Someone's been asking about Samuel's death and about Pa's funeral arrangements, almost like they're investigating whether the official story is true. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. That sounds good. Maybe they'll finally catch whoever killed him. Maybe. Alex's tone suggested he suspected otherwise. Of course, it could also mean someone's been spreading lies about what happened that night. Someone who doesn't understand the importance of family loyalty. The threat was clear, but I had expected it. Dr. Ellis had warned me that involving outside authorities would eventually alert Alex that his perfect crime was unraveling. The question was whether justice would arrive before Alex decided to eliminate the only witness who could testify against him. That night, Alex's assault was particularly brutal, designed to remind me of my helplessness. When it was over, he stood looking down at my bruised body with cold satisfaction. I've been thinking we might need to take a trip soon, he said casually. Maybe visit some relatives in another state. Get away from all these upsetting questions people are asking. I knew what this meant. Alex was planning to disappear, and he intended to kill me before he left. A wife who died in some tragic accident while fleeing painful memories would generate sympathy rather than suspicion. My body would never be found, and Alex would start fresh somewhere else with Robert's guidance. Time was running out faster than I had anticipated. The next morning, Alex left early to work on a roofing job in town, but not before locking me inside the cabin with a warning that he would know if I tried to leave. The lock was new, installed recently to give him complete control over my movements when he was away. But Alex had underestimated my desperation and ingenuity. Using tools from Samuel's old workbench, I managed to remove the hinges from our back door, creating an exit that would not trigger the front door alarm Alex had rigged to alert him if I tried to escape. The walk to town through the forest took over an hour, following deer paths and creek beds to avoid being seen on the main road. When I finally reached Dr. Ellis's office, I was scratched by thorns and exhausted from the difficult journey. Eleanor, Dr. Ellis exclaimed when I appeared at his back door. What happened? You look like you've been through a battle. Alex knows something is wrong, I gasped, accepting the glass of water he offered. He's planning to disappear and take me with him. We need to act now before he gets the chance. Dr. Ellis led me to his private office, where we could speak without being overheard by patients in the waiting room. I have news about your situation. The authorities arrested Robert Hayes in Chicago 2 days ago on fraud charges. He's confessed to faking his death and provided details about his correspondence with Alex. Relief flooded through me. Does that mean they'll arrest Alex too? They're working on it. But building a murder case takes time, especially when the original investigation concluded it was a robbery. They need more evidence than just Robert's testimony about manipulating Alex through letters. I have evidence. I pulled out the photographs I had taken of the most damaging letters, along with my documentation of abuse and threats. Everything is here. Proof that Alex killed Samuel, proof that Robert orchestrated it, proof that I've been held prisoner through violence and intimidation. Dr. Ellis examined the evidence with growing excitement. This is exactly what they need. With Robert's confession and these documents, they can build an airtight case against both men. But will it happen fast enough? I described Alex's plans to flee and his threats about taking me on a fatal trip. He's going to kill me as soon as he feels cornered. Maybe tonight, when he realizes I got out of the cabin. Dr. Ellis was quiet for a long moment, weighing options with medical precision. There's a way to force this to a conclusion quickly, but it would put you in considerable danger. I'm already in danger. Tell me what you're thinking. We could set a trap. Get Alex to confess on record by making him believe he's about to be exposed anyway. If he thinks you're going to testify against him regardless, he might try to intimidate you in front of witnesses, giving us the evidence we need for immediate arrest. The plan Dr. Ellis outlined was risky but elegant in its simplicity. He would schedule an appointment for me the following afternoon, ostensibly, to treat injuries from a fall down the stairs. Alex would insist on accompanying me as he always did for medical visits. But this time, Sheriff Harlan and a state investigator would be waiting in the next room listening to our conversation through the thin walls. All you have to do is mention the letters or Robert's involvement in Samuel's death, Dr. Ellis explained. Alex's reaction will either be complete denial, proving his guilt through obvious lies, or violent threats that will justify immediate arrest. What if he tries to kill me right there in your office? That's why we'll have armed law enforcement officers 10 feet away. The moment Alex makes any threatening move, they'll intervene. It was a desperate gamble, but it was also our only chance to end this nightmare before Alex disappeared forever. I agreed to the plan, knowing that tomorrow's appointment would either bring justice or result in my death. That evening, I returned to the cabin through the same forest route, carefully replacing the door hinges and eliminating any evidence of my absence. When Alex came home, he seemed satisfied that his prisoner had remained obediently locked in her cage. "Did you have a productive day?" he asked with mock concern. "I cleaned and did some mending. Nothing exciting." I served him dinner with hands that barely trembled, though my heart was racing with anticipation and terror about tomorrow's confrontation. After we ate, Alex settled into Samuel's chair with a bottle of whiskey and that hunting knife he had taken to carrying everywhere. "You know, Ma, I've been thinking about our travel plans. Maybe we should leave tomorrow instead of waiting for the weekend." The timeline was accelerating even faster than I had feared. "Tomorrow seems rushed. Don't you want to finish the Morrison roofing job first? Some things are more important than money." Alex's eyes were cold and calculating. Family comes first, always. That night, as Alex forced himself on me with particular violence, I stared at the ceiling and focused on a single thought. This was the last time he would ever hurt me. Tomorrow, one way or another, this nightmare would end. Either justice would triumph, or I would die fighting for it. But I would never again submit to the monster my son had become. The confrontation that would decide my fate erupted on June 14th, 1954, in Dr. Ellis's office during what Alex believed was a routine medical appointment. I had spent the morning in careful preparation, knowing that every word and gesture in the next hour could mean the difference between justice and death. Alex insisted on driving me to town in our old Ford truck, just as I had expected. His paranoia had reached fever pitch over the past week, and he watched my every move with the intensity of a predator sensing danger. "Remember?" he said as we parked outside Dr. Ellis's office. "You fell down the stairs yesterday morning while I was at work. Hit your head and bruised your ribs. Nothing more complicated than that. I understand. The lie came easily now after months of practice, but inside my heart pounded with anticipation. Sheriff Harlan and State Investigator Morrison were already positioned in the adjacent examination room, listening devices in place to record whatever happened next. Dr. Ellis greeted us with professional concern, playing his role perfectly. Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry to hear about your accident. Let's take a look at those injuries. As he examined the bruises Alex had inflicted during his latest assault, Dr. Ellis made careful notes and asked leading questions designed to expose the truth. These marks on your arms look like finger impressions. Are you certain they resulted from a fall? Ma gets confused sometimes, Alex interjected smoothly. The grief from losing her father has affected her memory. She imagines things that didn't happen. I see. Dr. Ellis turned to me with carefully rehearsed concern. Mrs. Hayes, have you been experiencing any other symptoms? Nightmares, perhaps disturbing memories about your father's death. This was my cue, the moment when everything I had planned and prepared for would be tested. I took a deep breath and spoke the words that would either save me or doom me. I've been having dreams about that night, about finding Samuel with his throat cut, about Alex standing over the body with blood on his hands. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alex went completely still, his face draining of color as he processed what I had just said. What are you talking about? His voice was carefully controlled, but I could see rage building behind his eyes. You found Samuel after robbers killed him. You weren't there when it happened. I know what I saw. I continued following the script Dr. Ellis and I had rehearsed. I know about the letters, too. The ones from Chicago. The ones from your father. Alex's mask of concern slipped, completely revealing the cold killer beneath. Dr. Ellis, you can see she's having some kind of breakdown. These fantasies about letters and impossible situations, she needs psychiatric help, not medical treatment. But Dr. Ellis was ready for this. Actually, Alex, I've been wondering about those letters myself, particularly the ones where Robert Hayes gives you specific instructions about dealing with family problems. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, where I knew he carried Samuel's hunting knife. His eyes darted between Dr. Ellis and me, calculating distances and options like the predator he was. I don't know what game you two think you're playing, Alex said slowly, but it ends right now. He pulled out the knife, then the same blade that had killed Samuel its steel, catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the office windows. Dr. Ellis stepped backward, his face pale with fear, while I felt a strange calm settle over me. Put the knife away, Alex, I said quietly. It's over. It's over when I say it's over. He turned the blade toward me, his eyes wild with the same madness I had seen the night he murdered Samuel. You had one job. Keep your mouth shut and play the grieving widow. But you couldn't even do that right. Because it was wrong. I stood up slowly, my hands visible and non-threatening. Covering up murder is wrong. Letting you hurt innocent people is wrong. And I won't be part of it anymore. You don't get to choose. Alex raised the knife, preparing to strike, just as I had known he would. His pattern of violence was predictable. When challenged or thwarted, he always escalated to potentially lethal force. But this time, I was ready for him. The door burst open as Alex lunged forward with the knife. Sheriff Harlan charged into the room with his gun drawn, followed immediately by State Investigator Morrison and 2 deputies. They had been listening to every word through the thin walls, waiting for Alex to reveal his true nature. "Drop the weapon," Sheriff Harlan shouted. "Now!" Alex spun toward the officer's knife, still raised his face, twisted with rage and desperation. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, he stood poised between surrender and suicidal violence. Then he made his choice. Instead of dropping the knife, Alex turned back toward me with murder in his eyes. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me," The gunshots were deafeningly loud in the small room. Sheriff Harlan and Investigator Morrison fired simultaneously, their bullets catching Alex in the chest and shoulder. He staggered backward, looking down at the spreading red stains on his shirt with an expression of complete surprise. "Ma," he whispered, sinking to his knees. You betrayed me. Don't," I said, simply feeling 2 years of terror and rage finally drain away. I chose truth over lies, justice over fear. I chose to be the person Samuel raised me to be instead of the victim you tried to make me. Alex fell forward, then the knife clattering harmlessly across the floor as life ebbed out of him. Dr. Ellis rushed to check for a pulse, but I already knew it was too late. The monster who had murdered my father and tormented me for nearly 2 years was finally dead. "Mrs. Hayes," Sheriff Harlan said, gently holstering his weapon, "are you injured?" "No." I looked down at Alex's body, feeling nothing but relief. "I'm not injured anymore." The aftermath moved with startling speed. Alex's death was ruled justified homicide in defense of civilian life. The evidence I had gathered, combined with Robert's confession from his Chicago jail cell, painted a complete picture of conspiracy, manipulation, and murder that satisfied even the most skeptical investigators. Robert was extradited to Kentucky to face charges of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to homicide. During his trial, he tried to claim that he had never intended for anyone to actually die, but his letters told a different story. The jury convicted him on all counts, and he received a life sentence that would keep him in prison until his death. Samuel's murder was officially reclassified as a homicide committed by Alex Hayes under the influence of prolonged psychological manipulation by his father. The robbery that had never made sense to anyone was finally exposed as the staged cover-up it had always been. Most importantly for me, the charges of complicity that I had feared never materialized. The evidence clearly showed that I had been coerced into silence through threats and violence, making me a victim rather than an accomplice. Dr. Ellis's medical documentation of my injuries, combined with witness testimony about Alex's controlling behavior, convinced authorities that I had acted courageously in exposing the truth rather than criminally in concealing it. As I walked out of the courthouse after Robert's sentencing free for the first time in over 2 years, I felt Samuel's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. Justice had finally been served for his murder, and the conspiracy that had destroyed our family had been completely exposed. The nightmare was over. But more than that, I had discovered something I never knew. I possessed the strength to fight back against evil, even when that evil wore the face of someone I loved. I was no longer Eleanor Hayes, the victim. I was Eleanor Hayes, the survivor, and I would never let anyone make me feel powerless again. The weeks following Alex's death and Robert's arrest passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and community reaction that ranged from sympathy to suspicious curiosity. As the full scope of the conspiracy became public knowledge, I found myself at the center of a story that fascinated and horrified our small Kentucky town. The trial preparations were exhaustive but necessary. I spent hours with prosecutors providing detailed testimony about the years of abuse and the evidence I had gathered. Every bruise, every threat, every moment of terror had to be documented and explained for the legal record. "Your courage in gathering this evidence likely saved other lives," State Prosecutor Williams told me during one preparation session. "Alex's violence was escalating, and there's no telling how many people he might have hurt if his crimes hadn't been exposed." The media coverage was intense, but generally sympathetic. Reporters from Louisville and even some national newspapers came to interview the Kentucky widow who exposed her own son's murder conspiracy. I gave carefully worded statements that focused on justice for Samuel rather than personal revenge against Alex. I want people to understand that domestic violence can happen anywhere to anyone, I told one journalist. even when the abuser is someone you love and trust completely. The most important thing is finding the courage to speak the truth, no matter how difficult or dangerous that might be. The community's reaction was more complex. Most neighbors expressed support and admiration for my bravery in exposing the truth, but some whispered that a proper mother would have found another way to handle the situation, that turning in your own son violated natural law regardless of his crimes. Mrs. Caldwell, bless her heart, became my strongest defender during this difficult period. Anyone who criticizes Eleanor for stopping a murderer doesn't understand what real courage looks like, she declared at every opportunity. That woman saved lives by putting justice ahead of misplaced loyalty. The dress shop became my refuge during the long months of legal proceedings. Working with my hands, creating beauty from simple fabric and thread, helped restore my sense of purpose and normalcy. Mrs. Caldwell even offered to make me a full partner in the business, recognizing that I would need financial independence to rebuild my life. Dr. Ellis continued providing both medical care and emotional support throughout the healing process. Trauma leaves scars that aren't always visible, he explained during one appointment. Your body will heal faster than your mind, but both will heal if you give them time and proper care. He was right about the healing process being gradual. Nightmares plagued my sleep for months. Dreams where Alex stood over Samuel's body with that terrible smile, or where I felt Robert's hands on me in ways that made me wake up screaming. But the dreams grew less frequent as time passed, and I learned to find comfort in the simple reality of waking up safe and free. The financial settlement from Robert's assets helped secure my future. His Chicago property and investments were liquidated to pay restitution to Samuel's estate and compensation for my suffering. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to buy a small house in town and ensure I would never again depend on anyone else for basic survival. Most importantly, I began to understand what Dr. Ellis meant about the difference between surviving and truly living. For 2 years, I had focused entirely on making it through each day without being killed. Now I could think about what I wanted my life to look like, what dreams and goals might still be possible for a woman who had survived the unthinkable. The legal proceedings concluded in October 1954 when Robert was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Standing in that courtroom and hearing the judge pronounce justice for Samuel's murder was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The evidence in this case reveals a conspiracy of extraordinary cruelty and calculation, Judge Harrison declared. Robert Hayes deliberately poisoned his son's mind against innocent family members, leading directly to murder and years of abuse. While this court cannot undo the suffering inflicted on Mrs. Eleanor Hayes and her father Samuel, it can ensure that justice is served and that these crimes are never repeated. Robert showed no remorse, even then glaring at me from the defendant's table with the same cold hatred I remembered from our marriage. But his hatred could no longer hurt me. He was going to die in prison, and I was going to live free. After the sentencing, I visited Samuel's grave for the first time since his funeral. The headstone was simple but dignified. Samuel Morrison, 1883-1952. Beloved father and grandfather. I placed fresh flowers on the grave and spoke to him as if he could hear every word. It's finished, Pa. They'll never hurt anyone again, and I'm going to be all right, stronger than I ever knew I could be. The hardest part of healing was learning to forgive myself for the years of blindness that had enabled the tragedy. I had ignored warning signs, made excuses for Alex's behavior, and allowed my love for family to override my instincts about danger. But Dr. Ellis helped me understand that self-blame was another form of prison. You were a mother trying to see the best in her child, he reminded me. That's not a character flaw. That's love. The fact that your love was manipulated and exploited doesn't make you responsible for other people's evil choices. By the spring of 1955, I had established a new routine that felt like genuine life rather than mere survival. I worked at the dress shop during the day, tended a small garden behind my house in the evenings, and attended church on Sundays, where I had become involved in helping other women facing family difficulties. The transformation was not just emotional, but physical. The chronic tension that had marked my face for 2 years gradually relaxed. I gained back the weight I had lost during the worst periods of abuse. Most importantly, I learned to sleep peacefully through the night, no longer listening for footsteps that might signal approaching violence. One evening in May, as I sat on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and crimson, Mrs. Caldwell stopped by for her weekly visit. "You look different," she observed, settling into the chair beside me. "Peaceful, like you've finally found your way home." She was right. After years of living in fear, I had rediscovered what it meant to feel safe in my own skin. The woman who had been too terrified to speak the truth was gone, replaced by someone who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly despite fear. The story that had begun with murder and betrayal was ending with justice and renewal. But more than that, it was ending with the knowledge that even the darkest evil could be overcome by ordinary people who refused to surrender their humanity. I was no longer Eleanor Hayes, the victim, or Eleanor Hayes, the survivor. I was simply Eleanor Hayes, a woman who had faced the worst life could offer and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live according to her own values rather than other people's expectations. The weight of silence had nearly destroyed me, but the power of truth had set me free. 3 years have passed since that terrible confrontation in Dr. Ellis's office, and as I write these final words in the summer of 1957, I can honestly say that my life has been rebuilt on a foundation stronger than anything I possessed before the nightmare began. The small house I purchased in Harlan has become a true home, not just a place to sleep safely, but a space where I can pursue interests and relationships that bring genuine joy. My garden produces vegetables that I share with neighbors. My sewing has expanded from necessity to artistry, and I have developed friendships based on mutual respect rather than dependence or fear. Mrs. Caldwell and I officially became business partners 6 months ago when her arthritis made it impossible for her to continue the detailed work required in dress alterations. The shop thrives under our shared management, and I have discovered that I possess a head for business that was never allowed to develop during my years of focusing entirely on survival. Dr. Ellis remains not just my physician, but a trusted friend who helped me understand that healing from trauma is possible with time support and the determination to build something better from the ruins of what was destroyed. His guidance taught me that strength is not about never being hurt, but about refusing to let that hurt define your entire existence. The community's acceptance of my story took time, but most people eventually came to understand that exposing family violence requires a special kind of courage that deserves respect rather than criticism. I have received letters from women in similar situations asking for advice about how to escape abusive relationships safely. These conversations remind me that my experience, terrible as it was, can serve a purpose in helping others find their own paths to freedom. Sheriff Harlan retired last year, but not before publicly acknowledging that his initial investigation of Samuel's death had been inadequate. "Mrs. Hayes showed us all what real detective work looks like," he said during his farewell speech. "Sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight, and it takes someone with personal courage to bring it into the light." The legal system's response to my case has led to some small improvements in how domestic violence and family murders are investigated in our county. Police officers now receive training about recognizing signs of coercion and manipulation that might cause victims to lie during initial questioning. It is a small change, but one that might prevent other families from suffering as mine did. Robert died in prison last winter, a heart attack that ended his life without fanfare or mourning. I felt no satisfaction in his death, but I also felt no grief. He had made his choices and faced their consequences. His influence over my life ended the day Alex was shot, and I refused to give him any additional power over my thoughts or emotions. The financial compensation from Robert's estate allowed me to establish a small scholarship fund at the local high school for students who want to pursue education beyond what their families can afford. It seems appropriate that money gained through such evil purposes should be used to create opportunities for young people to build better lives than the circumstances of their birth might otherwise allow. But tonight, as I prepare to close this account of the darkest chapter of my life, I want to record one final surprise that has given me more joy than all the practical victories combined. Yesterday, while cleaning out old boxes in my attic, I discovered something that made me weep with happiness for the first time in years. Hidden in the lining of an old suitcase that had belonged to Samuel was a letter addressed to me in his careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before his death. The letter reveals that Samuel had begun to suspect Alex's true nature and was planning to discuss his concerns with me after the harvest season ended. More importantly, it expresses his pride in the woman I had become and his confidence that I possessed the strength to handle whatever challenges life might bring. Eleanor, he wrote, "You have survived the loss of your husband and raised a son while building a life of dignity and purpose. I know there are troubles ahead. I can see darkness growing in the boy that worries me greatly. But I also know that you have your grandmother's steel beneath your gentle exterior. Whatever comes, you will find a way to do what is right, even when doing right requires great sacrifice." Samuel knew. Somehow, in those final weeks, he had recognized the danger growing in his own grandson. But rather than fear or anger, his letter expresses faith in my ability to protect myself and others when the time came for difficult choices. "You are stronger than you know," the letter concludes. "And you are loved more than you may ever realize. Whatever happens to me, live your life with the courage I have always seen in you, even when you could not see it in yourself." Reading those words written by a man who would be dead within days of putting pen to paper, I finally understood that my survival was not just lucky accident or desperate improvisation. It was the fulfillment of potential that Samuel had recognized long before I knew it existed. I had always thought of myself as someone to whom terrible things happened, a victim of circumstances beyond my control. But Samuel saw me as someone who could take control of circumstances, who could fight back against evil and win. He was right, and his faith in me, expressed in words I was not meant to read until after justice had been served, provides the perfect ending to a story that began with his murder. I am Eleanor Hayes, 47 years old, a woman who has learned that love without courage is helpless, but courage guided by love can overcome any darkness. I own my own business, my own home, and most importantly, my own life. I make my own decisions based on my own values, and I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that I chose truth over comfort, justice over safety, and hope over despair. The weight of silence nearly crushed me, but the power of speaking truth set me free, and I will never willingly surrender that freedom again. The nightmare is over. The rest of my story is just beginning.